towel.
Okay.
Hmm?
My towel? Sure.
Yeah.
But you're doing towels now? Is that why you're asking?
Yep.
Okay.
Towels and
Yeah.
tablecloths.
I don't know where my other one is like that. I have two like that. Because I do want to shower. Okay. Thank you. That'll be
Okay, good morning, everybody. We are doing chapter 15 today, really moving along. And we are going to continue speaking about the Beinoni and specifically different kinds of a Beinoni. Because in every single level of person, whether it's Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinoni, there isn't just one kind. There are, in all of those levels, there are kinds and myriad levels and all different nuances and subtleties and differences within those titles. So this perek, this chapter, the Alter Rebbe speaks about a very interesting concept that differentiates one Beinoni from another Beinoni. So just to remind ourselves about the Beinoni is different to a tzaddik in terms of his attraction or understanding of evil. So for a tzaddik, evil has no attraction whatsoever because his animal soul is completely transformed. It doesn't even come up for him. And even if it does come up for him, he not only does not have an attraction to evil, but a tzaddik despises evil. Right? And we did say that there are different kinds of despising evil, right? And we know that Hashem created evil as a means to an end for us to overcome evil. So a complete tzaddik will completely despise evil, even for what it is, not only for what it's as a means to becoming, right? To overcome. But a Beinoni, even though outwardly he may resemble a tzaddik very, very much so, because he has complete discipline and control over his thought, speech, and action, right? The expressions of the soul or the garments of the soul, the Alter Rebbe calls them. So he does not sin even in thought or speech or action. But for him, his animal soul is still there and it has the nature of an animal soul. And therefore, his animal soul is still attracted to evil. And let's just remind ourselves that evil is not something that we look at and we say, oh my gosh, what a terribly evil person who killed or raped or plundered, right? Evil is simply the concealment of Hashem in any of our thoughts, speech and action. In the context of Tanya. So the Beinoni does not despise evil. The Beinoni has an understanding of evil. The Beinoni understands why someone would be tempted to sin towards evil, correct? This for the Beinoni is largely on the subconscious level, on the level of involuntary emotions, right? But the expression of it all, the expression of this desire for evil is 100% controlled in the Beinoni in thought, speech, and action. Now, this brings a pasuk that the Alter Rebbe starts off the prophet Malachi, where Hashem speaks to the nation and he says, "V'shavtem ureisem bein tzaddik l'rasha," and you will return and see the difference between the righteous man and the wicked one. Bein oived Elokim la'asher loy avadu. Between he who serves God and he who serves him not. Now, at first glance, when we read this verse in the prophet Malachi, we can say that the pasuk is specifically speaking about a tzaddik and a rasha. But if we were to say that it's just differentiating only between a tzaddik and a rasha, it's a little bit repetitive. because the tzaddik is one that serves Hashem, and a rasha does not serve Hashem. So we know that the Torah does not waste words. Why would the Torah in this case say tzaddik and rasha, one who serves Hashem and one who doesn't serve Hashem? Right? There's no need for that repetition. It seems very repetitive. So the Alter Rebbe explains to us in terms of Tanya, in the framework of Tanya, that the last phrase is actually referring not to the tzaddik, not to the rasha, but to the Beinoni, who outwardly resembles a tzaddik and inwardly has something very similar to the rasha, which is an active animal soul. And interestingly enough, this last part of the verse, right, which is bein oyved Elokim asher lo yavadu, between someone who serves God or someone who does not serve God, it is actually written in the present tense. So an oyved Hashem is someone who is presently laboring in the service of Hashem. He is presently struggling against his own evil inclination or his animal soul. Might be on a subconscious level, might not be voluntary, but there is still this element of struggle. And he struggles against his evil nature with the goal of overpowering it. Now, what do we mean exactly by an evil nature? It's very interesting because, again, no one has an evil nature in terms of, oh, I'm so bad, such a bad person, right? But evil nature means a nature of someone who his nature conceals godliness. And we're all actually going to see in this chapter how the Alter Rebbe says that a person's nature is within his animal soul, right? His personality, his characteristics, why he does certain things on a default setting, that all comes from an animal soul and might even be good. Because we have good natures, right? We have good characteristics as part of our personality and nature. But if a person has an aspect of his nature which conceals godliness, the goal, his purpose in life, is to overcome it so that it should not find expression through the body, and therefore it is a constant and present battle. Even though the Beinoni controls the expression, but the battle, the struggle between the animal soul and the godly soul is still there. And what exactly is the nature of the struggle? The nature of the struggle is to use the divine light, which comes from the godly soul, which illuminates the godly soul, in the brain to rule over the heart, which the Beinoni actually achieves on a consistent basis. The Beinoni is a very consistent person. But that is the nature of the struggle, because he has an animal soul and an evil nature to overcome. And that is the purpose and the nature of his struggle. So now here's something very interesting, because in this pasuk, as the Alter points out, it's written in the present tense. He's an Oyved Hashem. He serves God. A tzaddik is called an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. There is a very big difference between saying that someone is a servant of God or someone serves God. Because a servant of God is a title. The Alter Rebbe said it's like a title, like a king. This person is a king, or this person is a wise man, right? But someone who is a servant of God, that's his title, because he has already banished the evil from within him, leaving actually a void in the seat of the animal soul, which is why David HaMelech, King David, said, Libi chalal bekirbi. My heart is empty within me. What does that even mean? It means the seat of the animal soul, which is in the left ventricle of the heart, was empty. He had completely transformed it, so it doesn't even exist, right? And once you reach that level, or you're given that level, or you're born that level, you have a title called servant of Hashem, right? Whereas us mortal human beings and potential Beinonis, we can be someone called an Oyved Hashem, someone who actively is serving right now Hashem, which means you are actively overcoming a struggle. And that is the Beinoni. And here we see in this pasuk actually that there are two levels of Beinoni. There is one that actually does serve Hashem, is actively serving Hashem. He's called an Oved Elokim in this pasuk that is quoted from Malachi. And then there is the Beinoni Asher Lo Yavadu, that is not serving Hashem. But the question is, that is very strange, because he's not a Rasha, so he's not sinning, right? He never sins, will never sin, has never sinned, according to the description of the Beinoni, especially if he reached the level of the Beinoni through doing tshuva. His sins are erased; they've been transformed into merits. So he's not considered to have sinned ever. And we call him with a description, Asher Lo Yavadu, that he's not serving God. The reason is because he is not conducting a battle at this present moment. He doesn't need, or he doesn't struggle with the Yetzer Hara, and this may be for two possible reasons. Number one, and again, we're talking about the Beinoni who's considered not to be serving Hashem. This could be, number one, because of his nature. Again, our animal soul is our nature. So maybe his nature, his natural tendencies are godly. He enjoys learning, for example. He is free of sexual temptations. That is not his nature. He is more of a cold personality, or for any other sin. And therefore, the hidden love which every Jew possesses, and by the way, that will be completely discussed in chapter 18, so we're quite near there, that is enough for him. To the hidden love of Hashem, that is a natural love of Hashem, which we have gotten as an inheritance from our patriarch Avraham Avinu, that is enough for him to avoid temptation and to motivate him to do mitzvahs. He doesn't really need to work so hard because it's his nature, so he doesn't have to rely on his intellect to produce a very strong love of Hashem to overcome temptations, because he doesn't have temptations in the first place. It's his nature. So this would be the first type of Beinoni who is not considered to be serving Hashem, and we're going to see why in a minute, that he's not considered to be serving Hashem actively. The other reason that he would be considered not to be serving Hashem actively is because he did serve Hashem in the past. He did have a struggle in the past. He did overcome his evil inclination, his Yetzer Hara, and subdue his animal soul. Now it's become second nature. Is everyone hearing me? Because I've got like this thing that my internet connection is unstable or something. Okay. So now he's reached the level and it's become second nature. And now, once it's second nature, he is not considered to be serving Hashem. And that seems very strange. We have to address this question, says the Alter Rebbe. In order to answer the question, the Alter Rebbe brings an example from Talmudic times, where it was common when somebody was learning Torah, he would review the material 100 times. But there were some people who went the extra mile and reviewed the material 101 times. In other words, they did something that was beyond what was customary. So the 100 times was customary in those times. That was a comfort zone. 101 times is out of the comfort zone. The other example the Alter Rebbe gives is, let's say if you hire a wagon driver, right? And in those times, the price would be 1 zuz for the distance of 10 parsi, like 10 miles, let's say, right? You would have to pay 1 zuz. But if you wanted to go 11 miles, 11 parsi, you have to pay 2 zuz. So it wasn't like really proportional. because that 11th mile exceeded the customary practice. As I was preparing this chapter, the thought came to me, and I don't know how many of you do exercise, but I will say that I, over the last year, have started doing exercise. So, that was a big accomplishment for me. And I know that when you do like certain repetitions, like let's say certain weightlifting, right? So the beginning is easy, you just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. And you do another repetition, you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I could do this anymore, right? But you keep on, if you go out of your comfort zone, that's where the magic happens. It's when it's hard for you to lift the weights that's actually doing the exercise, because that's having an effect on your body. So let's say you do 15 repetitions of, you do 3 repetitions of 15 weightlifting or whatever. By the time you're at the end, it's really hard, and those are out of your comfort zone. If you stay within your comfort zone, exercising, it doesn't have such an effect. So breaking a habit is so demanding that, going back to the muscle of reviewing the studying 101 times versus 100 times, and that is going out of your customary habits, the 101st time is equivalent to all the previous 100. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says someone who reviewed the material 100 times was not considered to be serving Hashem, whereas a person who reviews the material 101 times is called an Oved Elokim. He's serving Hashem because he's going out of his comfort zone. He's doing something extra. In order to change a habit, grow, or control the expression, transform the nature of the animal soul, the struggle and active service is required. It's not enough for the Beinoni to say, I've arrived. He may be a Beinoni. He may be a Beinoni on a very, very high level and is controlling expression. And it could be that it's either because of his nature or because he worked hard to get there. But he's arrived. If he's not going any further and he's not struggling to get to the next level, he is actually considered to not be serving Hashem. So how do we actively serve Hashem? What is this active service that is required of a Beinoni? So, number one, he contemplates Hashem's greatness, right? So he uses his intellect. He studies Torah, he studies Hasidus, he contemplates Hashem's greatness. And through that, he produces and arouses a great love on the right side of his heart. And the power of this love for Hashem enables him to transform his nature, which originates in the animal soul. That's the first way that he can be actively serving Hashem. The second way is by awakening the hidden love. Because the Beinoni who is not serving Hashem may be using the hidden love of Hashem, which we will discuss in chapter 18. It's not a produced love. It's an inherent love that everybody has for Hashem, but it's dormant, right? So the Beinoni who is not serving Hashem hasn't really awoken this love, but in a Beinoni who is struggling with his animal soul, the hidden love is not enough to compete with an active animal soul. You need to have an active hidden love to compete with an active animal soul. So maybe the Beinoni in the first scenario, who's not serving Hashem because of his nature, and therefore he can rely on the hidden love, it's because his nature, his animal soul has a quiet nature, not a loud and noisy, causing him to trip up nature, right? So that's why the hidden love is enough on a hidden level. But for a Beinoni to be considered to be serving Hashem, he has to activate that hidden love in order to serve Hashem actively. So it's either he will be producing a love of Hashem, or he will activate the hidden love. So a Beinoni who is seemingly perfectly serving Hashem is not considered to be serving Hashem unless he is growing. And one of the subtleties, like you could say, what do you mean growing? He doesn't do anything wrong. He does everything good, right? So one of the subtleties that Alter Rebbe mentions is it could be that he has an ulterior motive for the positive commandments. It's a very subtle examination that every Beinoni would have to examine his own soul. Every person judges and knows his own reasons for doing things. In other words, it's not enough to despise evil, but you have to actively also serve Hashem. That's why a tzaddik, by the way, going back to the description of a tzaddik is simply called an eved Hashem. He's not called an oived Elokim. He's not actively serving. He's a servant of Hashem because he does not struggle. A person, we learn from this parak that a person is judged not by the quantity of his actions, but by how much effort and sacrifice you are putting in. In other words, we are judged by the struggle, not by the results. Serving Hashem is taking one step closer to Him and one step beyond yourself. And that is why it's important to always to be growing and not to become complacent. And that is the reason why a Beinoni who has reached a certain level, whether by nature, whether by effort, if he's complacent, is not considered to be serving Hashem. And I think I've mentioned this before in this class, but I think it's very apt for this chapter to bring the example of the different stages of learning. This is not in Tanya, but it is a concept that I feel fits very well with Tanya, which are where we want to be in our Avodas Hashem. So for any skill that we can learn, there are different levels that we can reach. So the first level is called unconscious incompetence. Like we don't know that we don't know, right? A child who's learning to ride a bike. The first stage of learning, he doesn't even know that a bike exists, right? The second stage is conscious incompetence. Conscious incompetence is awareness, and awareness is one of the most powerful things that a person could have, because awareness brings true bechira, true choice. So once you have an awareness that you don't know, that's the second stage of learning, you have a choice to go to the third stage of learning and actually develop the skill. So let's say on a very, very basic level, the skill would be learning to ride a bike. So now the child knows that he doesn't know, and the third level would be called conscious competence, where he's learning, but he has to concentrate. It's not second nature to him yet. So he's learning a new skill. So he has to concentrate. And the fourth stage of learning is called unconscious competence, where something has become second nature. So going back to the Beinoni, if the Beinoni has reached the level of unconscious competence, in other words, all the work that he's done up till now has become second nature, that is not where you want to be. In actual fact, this parak teaches us that perfection is not the goal. You know, like people think they've arrived. Now I'm perfect. You're not. That's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us always, especially the Beinoni, to be in level 3, conscious competence, not be complacent, always seeking to grow, either by reflecting on Hashem's greatness and producing a love for Hashem so that your divine light can influence your animal soul, or awakening the natural love for Hashem, to have it in an awake state, to combat the active, and that will actually be more in chapter 18. But complacency is never considered to be serving Hashem, even in a Beinoni, who actually looks like a tzaddik. So Hashem doesn't want that necessarily. Tzaddikim are chosen by Hashem. A Beinoni is where we strive, who we strive to become. And on that quest to become a Beinoni, and each and every one of us, says Tanya, can become a Beinoni because of the very words that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the nation of Israel, saying, Ki korev elecha hadavar ma'od. It is near to you. It is very relevant. It is accessible to you to do the mitzvahs in this way. B'ficha u'v'lvavcha la'asaisa, in your mouth, in your actions, in your heart. Therefore, we can definitely, actively strive to serve Hashem and not be satisfied with the status quo. In other words, we're always seeking to go out of our comfort zone. Now, the thing with comfort zone is that our comfort zone then becomes when we go out of our comfort zone, that level, after a while, becomes our new comfort zone. And that's the awareness that the Beinoni has to have to not become entrenched in his comfort zone, but to consistently evaluate if his new nature is now become his comfort zone, and therefore to continue striving for greater levels of serving Hashem. Okay. Any questions, observations? Hi, Sarah, your hand up.
So I'm a little confused. It would seem that a conscious competence would be a higher level, or be the level that we're striving for, that we're never in the unconscious competence.
Yes, exactly. It's counterintuitive. One would think that you want to reach the fourth level.
Right.
So I always like to say that, and again, this is not in Tanya, this is not in Torah, I just like the example. I always say that for skills, if you want to know how to bake a kugel, or make a cake, or ride a bike, or drive a car, or sew, or paint a picture, yeah, you want to get to the fourth level. That's skills. But in personal development, there's no such thing as having reached the fourth level, because if you reach the fourth level and are saying, I've arrived, well, the only person that has reached the fourth level is a tzaddik in personal development, in that kind of growth, because there's no such thing as having arrived. First of all, that complacency can be challenged, right? And you could think, oh, I finally learned how to overcome my Yetzer Hara, and then the next day you have a huge big test, and you realize that you did not really you learn to overcome Yetzer Hara. Just the test is on a different level now, right? So that's why it's always a matter of cycling between these two levels. Like you reach the fourth level, but go back to the third level. You reach the fourth level, go back to the third level. In other words, always be in a constant state of growth and going out of your comfort zone. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay, so lots to reflect on.
I was thinking of the four, is it the four sons on Pesach? Is this representative in these levels of consciousness or growth?
I don't know. Is there something specific you're referring to?
No, just the four levels of growth you were talking to, and it's like the
Right.
four sons.
So I'm not familiar, but I mean, obviously I'm familiar with the four sons, but I'm not familiar to the aspect you're referring to, or the four levels of growth. So, but that would be something interesting to look into for sure. Okay, ladies. So, Mr. Hashem, we'll see everyone next week. Have a great week.
Thank you, Hannah.
Very welcome.